Up with a prayer by Reverend Reynolds. I'll make a few opening remarks and then I'll introduce Diane Powell, who will introduce our guest speaker for the evening. And Nicole, we'd like you to go on maybe 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions, answers, and discussion, okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so with that, Reverend Reynolds.
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord God, we thank you tonight, Lord God, for touching our hearts, Lord God. You are the God of peace. And Lord God, we ask you, God, to restore peace, God, in the nations, God, across the globe. But let the peace, God, be even beginning with each one of us, Lord God. God, let us speak peace. Let us love peace. Let's begin peace. Lord God, let us forgive. Lord, let love be a part of everything that we do. Let love our neighbors, love the ones who we need to love, God. God, let us thank this organization, Lord, and the speakers tonight, that we can reason together and make sure that as we move up, that we move everybody who needs moving up, that needs hope, that's helpless, that needs a voice. Lord God, that they can see that we are doing our best, God, to represent God to each and every one. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Oh, amen. Thank you, Reverend Reynolds. Well, welcome everyone. This is our De-Escalation Committee meeting that we have every other Wednesday night here in Washington, D.C. is where I'm headquartered and around the country. Someone else just logged in with the name Stephanie Myers on there. Who is this? Okay. Okay. Our mission started back in 2012 when we started Black Women for Positive Change with this goal to change the culture of violence in America. And for the past 9 years, this is our 10th year, we have been trying to promote the idea that violence prevention is possible. Now in America, it's a very complicated topic because America was born into violence with the Native American genocide, with the slavery situation that happened with African people brought here, forced here. But we do believe that individuals, communities, and families can learn how to de-escalate violence. And we believe this is something that we have to interject into our culture aggressively, because you can see violence is going on in some crazy records. And that's why we're going to have this topic tonight about the impact of it in domestic and in homes. So earlier today, Diane Powell and I had an interesting discussion with one of the leaders in violence prevention in Pittsburgh. And he was certainly making the point that we need to get a relationship going with national foundations so that we can really promote our national initiative. So I'm reaching out to all of you. We know that if you know people on the boards of directors of national foundations, that's what we need. During this pandemic, you can't reach people on the phone. You can hardly reach them by email. So we really have to develop an insiders network that we can apply to keep this initiative moving forward. Because the volunteer angle is rough. People are overwhelmed. They don't have the time and the energy to volunteer. So we're going to have to really expand what we're doing and staff up. So with that, just wanted to kind of reach out. Everyone's invited to join Black Women for Positive Change. Even though that is our name, we're multicultural, we're interfaith, and we have a wonderful network of good brothers, and we invite you all to be a part of that. So with that, I'd like to introduce our chairperson in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Diane Powell. I always refer to Pittsburgh as our model city because Diane has done an excellent job interfacing with the community there, and she's very dedicated. And so with that, Diane, please introduce our speaker for the evening.
Will do, and thank you, Dr. Myers, and thank you everyone who joined into tonight's workshop. We're really glad that you are supporting us this evening. Tonight, we're going to talk about another complicated topic, which is domestic violence. And for years, it has been an issue that remains kind of shrouded in secrecy. And there's tends to be a lot of shame among victims. And it can be a difficult situation to escape from. It's estimated that 1 in 4 women experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime, but domestic violence isn't just restricted to women. The victims can also include men, children, as well as the elderly. And when we talk about domestic violence, it's not just a physical beating. It also can include rape, sexual assault, robbery. So it's a very complex topic, and I'm glad that we invited Nicole Molinaro to join us this evening because she literally is an expert in this field. Nicole is the executive director and the CEO of the Women's Shelter of Greater Pittsburgh. And she has worked in this area for about 25 years. She started out as a volunteer and she was promoted to president of the Women's Center Shelter in 2018. Before that, she served as the executive director for communities and schools for 7 years and was the vice president of development and communications for an additional 7 years. She has earned her master's degree in psychology from Duquesne University, and she is a distinguished alumni of Pittsburgh's leadership program. So with that, we are very proud to introduce to you tonight Nicole Molinaro as our guest speaker. And after her presentation, we'll open up the discussion for questions and answers. Nicole?
Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you, Dr. Myers. And it is really a pleasure to be here with everybody tonight to talk about domestic violence. So thank you so much for having me here tonight. If I may just jump in and start to share my screen, that would be great. As I'm doing that, I do just want to mention, of course, when we're talking about domestic violence or intimate partner violence, it can be triggering. So please just take care of yourself during this. If you need to take some big deep breaths, if you need to walk away, just do what you need to do because it can certainly be triggering. So I was asked to talk specifically about domestic violence and how the pandemic has impacted domestic violence victims. So that is really what we're going to focus on today. Before I jump into that, I wanted to advance my screen, which is not advancing. Oh, there we go. Okay. Talk for literally like 30 seconds about Women's Center and Shelter of Greater Pittsburgh. We were one of the first 6 battered women's programs in the United States. We have grown exponentially since then. We now serve between 7,000 and 8,000 adult and child survivors every year. We also have a program serving individuals who use battering and abuse. We have comprehensive services. So basically, wherever you are in your journey, whether you are just trying to figure out if you're in an abusive relationship or whether you are literally fleeing for your life or anywhere in between, we have people and programs who can help you to achieve whatever your goal is. And our core components are based in the sanctuary model, which is to provide trauma-informed care. Our other components are safety, they're women-centered business systems, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are the 4 kind of legs of our stool, so to speak. And as we talk about domestic violence, and specifically in regards to COVID during a pandemic, it really is critical to remember that domestic violence is a pattern of using power and control. So when we're talking about a pandemic, if you think about it, I think all of us feel like the world has been out of control during the pandemic, right? So if you are somebody who uses abuse and control, that feeling of the world being out of control can really be triggering. And you put on top of that, for instance, financial insecurity, food insecurity, isolation, which is a tactic that batterers often use, but it's unfortunately part of our response, our community's response to the pandemic is, we are a lot more isolated. Our social systems aren't what they used to be. We may or may not be physically at work. We may or may not be physically in church. We may or may not physically even be out and about in the neighborhood and have our friend circles. So that isolation has really played into domestic violence increasing in both severity and frequency. So we're not talking about relationships that are healthy suddenly turning abusive, right? That's not what we're talking about. We are really talking about people who were either already using abuse and control, getting worse, getting more severe and more frequent, or we're talking about people who have been prone to using abuse and control. So at some point in the relationship, it would have, become more abusive. Somebody who there are red flags for instance, but the pandemic has really kind of sped things up. So the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said that this is at the beginning of the pandemic, right? So when we think back to like March, late March and early April, he said that we were expecting a horrifying spike in domestic violence. And we were expecting for domestic violence to increase in both severity and frequency. And the reason that he was saying that is because we've really seen other pandemics. For instance, when you look at Ebola, when you look at Zika, when you look at these other pandemics and you've seen even natural disasters, you see domestic violence increasing in severity and frequency. And knowing the scale of COVID, he was really anticipating this happening. Unfortunately, we have seen this with our clients who are really experiencing this and really feeling this. So we know this to be true. So, if we talk for a minute about what the trends are, it's really interesting because unfortunately, even though domestic violence has been increasing in severity and frequency, unfortunately, the ability to reach out for help has been decreasing. And that of course makes sense as well, right? Again, the isolation, the not being out and about as much as everybody is used to being. When you have your abuser who is in the household with you, perhaps monitoring you 24/7, or just being around all the time, you don't have the flexibility necessarily to make a phone call. You don't have a coworker right there to talk to about the situation and have them help you to reach out for help. So you combine these two things and it really kind of is a recipe for disaster. So when we look back at the beginning of the pandemic and we look at some trends, we look at protection from abuse order filings, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, filings for protection from abuse orders were down by over 40% in Allegheny County. They were 43% lower than a comparative time frame the year prior. When you look at our hotline calls, and this is pretty typical for any domestic violence program, hotline calls were down by over 40%. When you are talking about childline reports, unfortunately, childline reports at the beginning of the pandemic were down by over 50%. So we are talking about absolutely massive decreases in people's ability to reach out for help. Now, we were hearing from the city of Pittsburgh police from across the county and indeed across the nation and really worldwide, that in some cases, they were not getting as many calls for domestic violence. And in other cases, they were getting absolutely slammed with the need. And so what we were seeing at that point in the pandemic early on is that really the only people reaching out for help were people who were absolutely in fear for their lives or in such a desperate situation that they knew they had no alternative but to reach out. So with the chief of Mount Lebanon Police here on the phone, on the call, I would love to hear during the Q&A or now what the Mount Lebanon Police saw with domestic violence. But I know it was kind of wildly different based upon the different police forces across the country. So, but we look at all those at the beginning of the pandemic, those trends at the beginning of the pandemic, and what I did was kind of overlay the red phase, the yellow phase, and the green phase in relation to specifically our hotline calls. And the hotline calls really kind of they trended the same as the PFAs did and as the child lines did. So when you look at the red phase of the pandemic, which was from mid-March to mid-May, Our hotline calls, again, were down 43% in March, about 43% in April. They stayed at about the same level of being decreased during the pandemic, red phase. When we moved into the yellow phase, our hotline calls were down by about 32%. So that's actually a pretty good jump, right? And that's about where we saw PFAs in Allegheny County as well. And child lines were starting to creep up a little bit too. When we moved into the green phase, which was May 6th until technically the present, we started to just creep up and creep up and creep up until we have finally reached a level where we are not only getting the same number of calls as we did pre-pandemic, but actually starting to get more. Protection from abuse orders, same things, crept up, and they are now at the level of either around the same as they were pre-pandemic, and in some cases up to 10% in a week than a comparative period for last year. Child lines, thankfully, have also been increasing, but same, it's, kids aren't where they need to be to have.
Okay, we're losing Nicole's audio. Diane, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. She's been having kind of an on and off experience today also with her system.
Yeah, it's a system thing because her audio and her camera are both on.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what the last thing is that you heard, but all I know is that I was suddenly talking to myself.
Okay, we're here. We're glad you're back.
Okay, I'm glad I'm back too. I'm going to try to screen share again. So sorry about that. All right. Okay, so all right, there we go. So anyway, what I was trying to say is that the trends are moving in the right direction, but we're anticipating, global experts are anticipating that the need for domestic violence services will continue to increase for the next year to 2 years. So I'm gonna stop share. I'll share again in a moment, but I wanted to stop sharing for a second to kind of have more of a discussion about what we're hearing from our clients, right? So, unfortunately, when we're talking about what we're hearing from our clients, the list is just overwhelming and it's depressing. Overall, we're seeing that those who were kind of already on the edge have just been pushed over the edge. And that is, I think, for anybody who is experiencing, inequities, right? So not just around domestic violence, but anybody who was already close to the edge for any reason, whether it's mental health, whether it's drug and alcohol, whether it was intimate partner violence, whether it was other social inequities. The pandemic has really kind of put them over the edge. Access to healthcare, poverty, all of these issues have been so greatly impacted, unfortunately, by the pandemic. As domestic violence, Diane was kind enough to go over some statistics at the beginning of the presentation. And as she mentioned, 1 out of every 4 relationships is chronically abusive. 1 out of every 3 women specifically, and 1 out of every 7 men have experienced severe domestic violence at some point in their lives. Unfortunately, for African-American women, that number has increased. It's actually 40% of all African-American women, statistics say, have experienced serious violence at their hands of a partner. And unfortunately, that's not saying that African-American men or the partners of African-American women are more violent. It's saying that really the systems that are designed to protect everybody are, of course, as we know, so often very inequitable to people of color. So, if you are experiencing domestic violence, and you're African American or a person of color, you may be less likely to reach out for help because of concern that the justice system, what's going to happen to your partner when you reach out for help, right? So we have to really acknowledge this when it comes to domestic violence as well. And in the pandemic, we have absolutely seen that trend as well.
Now, Nicole, hold on.
So
Nicole,
we're also again,
Nicole,
yeah.
hold on a moment. Did you say 40% of African-American women? Now, where does that statistic come from?
40%, unfortunately.
Where does that,
You know what? I have all of my, what's that?
where does that statistic come from?
That I want to say that might be that's from the CDC. I can get you my statistics afterwards. I have them all. There's so many different statistics for
My goodness.
yeah. Oh, I know, it's devastating. And like I said, it really, you know, in the field, we very much believe that that is because that so many of the systems that are intended to really protect, again, everybody, are so inequitable and have been so inequitable over time. That it just, you know, it doesn't protect African American women as much as other demographics. So I'm going to write that down to get you the statistic though. All right. So again, we're seeing increases in the severity and frequency of domestic violence. We're hearing our clients talk about just absolutely horrific violence, physical violence more seriously, you know, sexual violence, increased tensions. We are hearing our clients who have not been even bothered by their ex-partners for a while, and their partners have resurfaced and are causing problems, possibly in some cases around custody, and in other cases around just out of the blue, right? They haven't bothered them for ages and they have literally just resurfaced during the pandemic. We're seeing safety and safety plans being impacted. So unfortunately, we always do safety planning with clients, but we've had to do really new and creative safety planning with our clients because of increasing tensions in the house, around increasing tensions around the custody issues, around communication with the kids. We've seen, you know, clients who have not been able to reach out for help, reach out for support. They've not been able to financially plan to leave because they're either being watched so much more closely during the pandemic in this phase of isolation, or because they've been financially impacted, right? Or their partners have been financially impacted. And so they're not able to save as much as they've been planning to. We're unfortunately also seeing children witnessing violence more than ever because, of course, everybody's home, right? So the violence is happening. And whereas it might have been able to be behind closed doors prior, now kids are just home and they're witnessing more. And in some cases, we've seen at Women's Center, we've seen an increase in the amount of kids getting involved in helping to defend the non-abusive parent. We've seen custody orders being impacted. And, you know, so we've had abusers who have not returned children despite custody, you know, orders. And in some cases really, and often have been using the pandemic as an excuse for that. So for instance, they don't want for them to be in the mom's household because they're worried that they're going to get COVID, right? That COVID has been used as an excuse for everything from custody to literally murder. There have been abusers who have murdered their partners and left behind notes saying that they were fearful that they were going to get COVID. You know, there's unfortunately so many obstacles in our clients' lives already that, you know, COVID has really impacted that as well. So you add one more thing on, and in this case, a really big barrier, COVID, and it's even harder to get protection from abuse orders. You know, all of the kind of usual problems are really exacerbated. And then of course, increased financial needs. So again, with so many folks being impacted by food insecurity, by job insecurity, by loss of jobs. We have so many clients who are either out of work or their ex-partner or their partner's out of work. In other cases, we have abusers not paying child support because they're out of work. We have lack of food and supplies because, you know, everybody's home, right? And people are just going through food faster. And, you know, not to be so depressing, I really want to phrase though that we have seen so much gratitude because the clients that are in our shelter, for instance, and are in our services are so thankful. And I know this is the case for domestic violence programs across the world, right? They're so thankful that they are able to reach out for support. And they're so thankful that they have people who believe them and are able to support them. And there really is help and hope available. And I want to stress that when we look at fatalities that are domestic violence related, only 4% of all of those who are murdered have been in touch with a domestic violence program. So getting involved with the domestic violence program is a huge protective factor. So if I may just share my screen for one more moment. Move on to the next slide. It is so difficult to forward slides in Zoom. Here we go. I just love this quote. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. And that is just very much the case with our clients. We see so much courage from our clients, just really wanting to better their situation for themselves and their kids and just live a life free from violence, which is what everybody, of course, deserves. So Women's Center and Shelter, you know, we have been working nonstop. We pivoted as everybody had to, right, during the pandemic. We all of our services have been either delivered in person when needed with all safety precautions in place. So our shelter, our children's program, our child welfare program have still been delivered in person. All of our other services have been delivered remotely using HIPAA compliant platforms, but we're still able to offer therapy, support groups, immediate needs coordination, medical advocacy, legal advocacy. Our legal advocates have been incredible doing their work as a hybrid, both in court when needed and remotely when not. So, you know, our civil law project attorneys have still been fully functioning. They've been doing full court hearings and trials via Zoom. So, you know, everybody's just been really doing their best. We've been working on so many different policy issues. We worked on inmate release to try to make sure that as inmates were being released earlier on because of COVID, that those who are most dangerous to their partners were either, you know, not released if they were that dangerous, or that they were released in a way that the victim was still safe. So we still made sure we safety planned with her. So we tried to work so hard on so many different policy issues, and, you know, some COVID silver linings, right? This has really impacted the way our work will continue. So we are going to continue after this to still do support groups and individual counseling remotely when it's better for the client. We'll obviously still have in-person services. And we're working within Allegheny County to make the protection from abuse order process fully remote when it's better for victims, because that is always the safer way to go for victims. And there's lots of barriers to that right now, but we're really working to make sure that happens. So here are various ways to reach out: call, text, or chat, and I can send you that information as well. And I will stop screen sharing here and see if there's any questions. Hopefully that was right on the dot for 15 to 20 minutes.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Absolutely. So what questions does everybody have?
Yes, please, let's open it up. And I'm still trying to get over that 40%.
I know, it's devastating. And the other demographic groups that are impacted at a higher rate when it comes to domestic violence are women who are bisexual and trans women specifically, and trans women of color are impacted at a much higher rate by domestic violence. Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear from the chief if he has any comments about this whole subject, and what's your perspective, Chief Love?
Yeah, I can speak for our community. Those numbers that Nicole stated are right in line. You know, the beginning of the pandemic, we were having, you know, very little calls related to much of anything, let alone domestic violence or child abuse or anything along those lines. So yeah, our numbers fell right in line with what Nicole was speaking of. And then as, you know, it progressed through and we hit the different phases and, you know, started getting into some of the reopening, we definitely saw a resurgence of calls. And a couple interesting points that I'd like to make. One of the things that we've noticed specifically is domestic related calls in multifamily units, whether it be apartment buildings, whether it be other types of dwellings that are multifamily. we've noticed an increase in those. And the only thing I can point towards as to why is a lot more people are home, working from home, paying attention to what's going on in their buildings and their neighborhoods. And ultimately, those calls that we're getting are coming not from within the house, but from neighbors who observe that there's some sort of situation that needs attention. So that's an interesting statistic that I saw. And I do also agree with Nicole. We've heard from a lot of different victims of domestic violence that the PFA process has become especially complicated related to COVID. The courts are difficult to work with because they're really not open, and they have not been open. And the virtual solutions to that are slow in coming. So we've tried to spend a lot of extra time working with victims, working through the lethality assessment program that we participate in with the Center for Victims here in Pittsburgh, to make sure that we're getting those safety plans in place for our victims, making sure that they're getting that immediate assistance that they need through that program.
Right, in the court system, thank you for saying that, Chief. The court system, they've in Allegheny County has there have been 7 different orders over the pandemic, each of which has changed some facet of the court process. PFAs have been the only thing that have been available the entire pandemic, but that has been very difficult to communicate because of exactly what the Chief just said. The rest of the court system oftentimes has not been open or fully functioning. And so it's really been hard to get the word out. We at Women's Center and Shelter, we did several big campaigns, including having a web page specifically dedicated to COVID, where all the up-to-date legal information was available. Excuse me. We did postcards in all of the different Giant Eagles around the area saying all of the DV programs are open and operating. We did flyers and food bank boxes saying the same thing, really just getting out the word that domestic violence programs were open and operating, that PFAs were available, was a challenge, especially earlier on when the only thing that was open pretty much were like grocery stores, right? So we're like grocery stores, hospitals, and domestic violence programs. We're still here. Please reach out. It's been difficult. Yeah.
Now, if you had a magic wand, Nicole, or Chief, if you had a magic wand, what would you want that could help really dramatically help this situation? Well, how do we stop people from committing violence and instead going to take a walk or meditating or cooling out? What would you recommend? How do we reimagine family so that this stops?
I love that question, Dr. Myers. And I do have a magic wand. I have a 7-year-old daughter, so I have a magic wand probably within reach. I wish it actually worked, but I've many different answers to that. The primary one is that, the focus, I think, really needs to be on the person who's perpetrating the violence to make the change. Right now, the victim, the survivor of violence, that is who the burden is completely on, right? The burden to get the protection from abuse order, the burden throughout the whole court process. They're oftentimes the one who is losing a job because they're being stalked at work, or they are the ones having to go to the hospital, et cetera. So the burden is so much on the victim. So what I would change is to have, really the focus be on the person who's perpetrating the violence and help them to get, to make change. So this is a learned behavior, right? It doesn't, typically doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's a learned behavior, but that means that it can be unlearned. So in our batterers intervention program, we see over 500 men who batter every year. We have a court-ordered group for women who were ordered to batterers intervention programs as well. But if we focus on the batterers intervention program for the men, we're one of 4 programs in the county. And it's a 24-week program that really teaches, kind of helps them to kind of unpack, why are you behaving like this? What's going on? What did you learn? And what are different ways to behave? And what are different coping mechanisms? So the problem is that it's not just kind of a one-time thing, right? This is a whole pattern of power and control that's being used. So it's learning a whole different way to communicate within a relationship. It's oftentimes learning a whole different way of being in the world. So it's really complex. 24 weeks is nothing, right? In California, batterers intervention programs are a year long. And then when you put on top of that somebody, a batter, somebody who uses abuse and control, who also has drug and alcohol problems or mental health problems, and that can really, it's really difficult to work with domestic violence overlaid on those issues. So my magic wand would be to take batterers intervention more seriously, to extend it to 52 weeks, to have drug and alcohol programs first, and then the domestic violence batterers intervention counseling, and for the justice system to really treat domestic violence like the crime it is. And actually domestic violence isn't even a crime in Pennsylvania, right? Various aspects are. So assault, of course, stalking, terroristic threats, for instance, they are crimes. But domestic violence, coercive control, which is a huge part of domestic violence, is not a crime. And that is often what really contributes so much to the ongoing cycle of domestic violence. So sorry, I'm starting to go into all my different things. I'll take it back a notch, but say that there's so much to change within the court system, the justice system, and also in treating domestic violence. Seriously, if it was against a stranger, oftentimes the person would be serving consequences, and if it's against an intimate partner, it's not taken seriously. So that would be my short answer, believe it or not. But Chief Lux, what would you say?
I think you covered it well, Nicole. I don't have a whole lot to add other than I have always agreed with the layered approach to things. I think we have to affect it from all angles. That was one of our reasons for being an early adopter of the lethality assessment program. It wasn't enough just for our officers to respond and restore the peace and make an arrest if possible or if necessary. It was our goal to get that help started as quickly as possible. Right. And that occurs on scene, while the officers are still there handling the situation. So I think that was a very important piece to put in place. And I just would like to see that continue. I'm a big technology believer. And I know there's some programs, at least in the works, that I know you're involved with, Nicole, for some programs through our district attorney's office that may utilize technology to help track domestic violence offenders, to alleviate some of the jail population and ultimately still be able to hold these folks accountable whenever they are going through some of the batter intervention programs that they need to go through. So I would like to see more of that, but yeah, I'm a big believer in lots of different layers to make sure that just in case one isn't successful, one of those layers or one of those programs, hopefully another one would pick it up, and ultimately they'd find success somewhere along the journey.
Yeah, I have a question. I used to do a lot of work in DC and different shelters and working with women. And the one thing they didn't want was faith leaders. They didn't want, and when I think of healing, I automatically think of God. It's hard for me to talk about healing without talking about God, but they didn't want that. And when you think about violence, you think about God as a God of peace, but they didn't want to hear that either. So I just want to know, do you have any of the faith leaders or priests or rabbis or different people of faith, preachers, pastors, rabbis working with you?
I love that question. My home church is East Liberty Presbyterian Church. So I live in Mount Lebanon and go from there to ELPC during non-COVID times, of course. And my faith is very important to me. We, a lot of times domestic violence programs, just like any other nonprofit, run it's kind of a thin line because we can't be faith-based organizations, right? But that doesn't mean that for clients who are faith-based and who their faith is going to be what helps them, that we can't help them to kind of tap into that as part of their healing. So we, when we have clients who identify their faith as important to them, we can help to connect them to different resources. I know I see Erin Morey on the call, not to put you on the spot, Erin, but Erin is one of our, she's a longtime volunteer and is now a staff person, and is also in seminary. So, you know, I mean, it's, yeah, there you go. Thumbs up for that. Yeah. So we absolutely over the ages have had staff who that has been a focus, their faith has been a focus of their work outside of Women's Center and Shelter. And when it's appropriate with clients, absolutely helping them to make those connections, I think, is critical.
That's
So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it's important because our ministry, we were run out of shelters and homeless shelters and different programs. We couldn't pray, we couldn't do anything because, but I'm glad to see that your program does.
Yeah, it's hard when there's like in our shelter, we wouldn't be able to have anybody come in and pray specifically with the group, because then you might have people of all different faiths, right? And so we want to make sure we're inclusive to everybody, which unfortunately sometimes means we can't have people in who would just focus on one faith. But, you know, in our overall client service, we absolutely can help to accommodate connections to faith journeys. Yeah.
Nicole, I have a question, if I may jump in. Maybe Nicole and maybe the Chief Lauf could answer this as well. I have a question about the PFAs. You know, and I heard you talk about the difficulty with COVID of getting a PFA, but someone has an active PFA or they get a PFA. Can you speak to enforcement? You know, how what are some obstacles or challenges with enforcement?
And please give your name so everyone knows who you are.
I am Stephanie Myers.
No, you're not. That's your name?
That's my name. Yeah, that is my name.
Really?
Okay.
Oh wow, we got
I thought you were kidding.
we got
Oh, that's my name.
Stephanie Myers.
Are you in Pittsburgh?
I am in Mount Lebanon. Yeah.
Yeah, I know Stephanie. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Isn't that a riot? Okay, very good.
Well, and you have to understand the last call for here, we had, there was a Zoom thing that happened and there were what, 30 Jen Particas, right? Is that right? Was that not this group? I thought this was this group.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
So please answer Stephanie's question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
Chief Lauf, do you want to go ahead with that one?
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump on that one. Yeah, I'll say one of the biggest challenges that we have is oftentimes convincing the victim that they are in need of a PFA. You know, we try to talk about the advantages to getting it, that it actually then creates a court process where the suspect or the offender can be held accountable just by violating that court order. You know, it can be contact, and that contact can be as much as a phone call, it can be a text message. So it really puts a lot more restrictions in place. Sometimes the difficulty that we have is convincing the victim that that's the right way to go. You know, because once that paperwork is in place, we are usually very successful in enforcing those. And I say that is good to get that on record or get that court process in place, because ultimately whenever the suspect is aware of that, they do seem to be less likely to violate it. And that way, whenever they do come around, they contact the victim, anything like that, it does give us something to rely on to be able to go back and enforce that no contact that the PFA puts in place. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. The reason why I asked that, or Nicole, you can jump in too. I was thinking about a court case in 2005 where it went to the Supreme Court, where a lady was challenging the police on a PFA. And I was just wondering if there was any kind of new developments on enforcement. So yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, answer my question.
And you know,
Yeah.
and I'll add to that if I may. That, you know, I mean, living here, I know that Mount Lebanon police handle domestic violence seriously. unfortunately not all police departments do. And within police departments, even police departments that do, there are some individual, officers who don't. And that's really unfortunate. And it's also unfortunate that enforcement sometimes is really reliant on the police and enforcing. And so, unfortunately, even during the pandemic, we've had misinformation being given out by different police forces, not Mount Lebanon, but we've had some misinformation. We've had the police really actively kind of discouraging any pursuit of anything, even when there very clearly should have been a lethality assessment done. Very clearly should have been other action taken. And you can file for an indirect criminal contempt if a PFA is violated, and a lot of times that's not done. So unfortunately, it's, if I had that magic wand that Dr. Myers asked about, that's one of the other things, is that the enforcement would happen in a much more, it should be systemic, and it's not. But, thankfully we do have some really good police departments, and then sometimes not so much.
Hi, I'm Reverend Greg from Pittsburgh myself, and I was just thinking, and really that question I think that Stephanie talked about, and you walked into the different police zones and how things are different. We certainly know that my work is generally done with Zone 1. So I'm on the north side of Pittsburgh, where there's 18 different communities. And so I know that that's handled differently than the community of Mount Lebanon. So I was wondering, with all the stats that you talked about, have you looked at it by neighborhood? And is there work, in some of the higher areas than others, Nicole?
Yes, we have, and yeah, you could not be more right. Yes, there is some work to be done in some areas more so than others. What Chief Lauf mentioned with the lethality assessment, that is used not in every police department throughout Allegheny County, but most, and it's really a very valuable tool. It is a questionnaire that was based on research about domestic violence, lethality specifically. And what the lethality assessment program does is really connect victims on site when a police officer answers a call, connects the victim to the local domestic violence program. So we work with the city of Pittsburgh specifically with the lethality assessment program, and we get over 1,000 referrals from them a year. 70% of those calls are new to Women's Center and Shelter. So that is a ton of people being referred through the lethality assessment. And that does not include this year in COVID, because it really has gone so drastically down, but that's in the, we've been using it since 2014, and it's been pretty consistently at about 1,000 calls per year. So there are ways to systematize it, but it's just kind of like any other job. It really is based on the human element of who's there to enforce it. And it has to be taken seriously from the top as well.
We talk about changing the culture, and we take that very seriously, because a lot of the men who commit violence saw their fathers do it. And so they just think that's the way men are supposed to act. Right. And a lot of the women who abuse their children were abused themselves when they were children. So how can we address these larger systemic issues where people feel like they can just, fight and scream and cuss and holler and beat somebody up, and that's proof of their manhood?
Right. So I think that's a great question. I think it can be done it needs to be done on multiple levels, all at the same time. On a societal level, we need to be saying this is not okay behavior. Domestic violence is not okay. Love is not, abuse is not love. And we have to hear it in the news and in the media and with celebrities, and unfortunately, you get the NFL who says that they're against domestic violence and then doesn't take it seriously in their actual actions, so there's other, there's other examples on a societal level where society is basically saying it's okay, right? So we need to have kind of our larger societal picture make domestic violence absolutely unacceptable. And then on an individual level, it's really all about education. So relearning how to be, healthy in a relationship. What does a healthy relationship look like? And really that can start, in preschool for kids. So we have education programs, as the other domestic violence programs do. We don't nearly reach everybody that we need to, but it's a start, right? And our Women's Center and Shelter right now is working primarily in middle schools and high schools, but we actually have a pre-K curriculum that teaches the little kids. And we never use the terms domestic or dating violence, but we talk about consent, and we talk about healthy touch. And we talk, about all of those different, how to say no, which we know, of course, most toddlers know how to say no very well, but in the context of a family. So, the work really needs to start with the little ones and continue, and it has to be at an individual level, a family level, and really a societal level. Does anybody else want to? I'm sure other people on this call have other answers to that. Did anybody else want to jump out and answer that?
So Nicole, is there a training program that you're doing kind of citywide or in the different neighborhoods?
Yeah, so community education wise, we're more responsive than proactive. We will talk to any group that wants to talk to us and learn. School wise, we're working in several Pittsburgh public schools and in some charter schools and in some community groups with the youth. So yeah, we used to actually have a so I boomeranged back to Women's Center and Shelter, right? And when I was at Women's Center the first time, we had 9 full-time educators who were in everything from grade school to high school and everything in between. And by the time I came back to Women's Center, which was only, it was 10 years after I had left, we didn't have an education department. We had one person, the director of education. So now we've built it back up. We actually have 4 community educators now. But we're really trying to build back up and get to where we were because, education, like looking at the Coaching Boys into Men program, which is working with coaches and teaching youth who are involved in sports. We do hotspot mapping, which is working on dating violence issues within schools and looking at where there are hotspots, right? So in every school, there are areas where it's not safe. And the kids know it, right? But oftentimes the administrators don't even realize or don't really know what to do about it. So it's working within that community, in that school, to make the whole school itself safer. In addition to working on our curriculum, which is called Hands Are Not for Hurting. So, unfortunately, it's not an easy answer. None of this is easy. Right. None of it is kind of one time, but we just have to keep on going at it.
Thank you.
Well, this has been a very good conversation, and we really appreciate your input. I invite everyone to put their emails in the chat room if you would like to be invited to future sessions with the De-Escalation Committee. Nicole, there's some legislation up before the Congress where funding would be available to support de-escalation programs. And so any support that you and your network wish to give, the legislation was introduced a couple of years ago, and it really hasn't gotten very far. The de-escalation issue is just not seen as something big enough to support. So we're trying to mobilize people around that as well.
I would love to get more information about that. We do public policy work at Women's Center and Shelter, but then I'm also involved with our state coalition's public policy committee. So I would love to learn more about that legislation.
Okay, Diane, will you fill her in on that, and you can share the legislation. Diane can get a copy of it to you.
I'll do that tomorrow.
Well, we try to make this work within an hour. So if anyone has any observations or comments they'd like to make, please go ahead and do that now.
if I may just say in closing, especially during the pandemic, it's so important to, help to reach out on behalf of someone else that might be suffering from intimate partner violence. And so with their permission and in a safe way, you can call our hotline to safety plan for somebody else. We've really relied on family members, friends, neighbors, church folks to really reach out on behalf of the person who's being victimized, because they may not be able to reach out. So just remember, there is help and there is hope, and you are welcome to call. It doesn't have to be the person who's being victimized. So.
Well, Nicole, we're getting unanimous compliments for your presentation.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
thank
Oh,
you very
you were
much.
wonderful to I'm going to put my email in the chat too. It was wonderful to see everybody. Thank you so much, and great conversation. I really appreciate being able to have this conversation with
Well,
everybody.
it's an ongoing conversation, and you're certainly welcome to be a part of the network. And we just have to find some answers, because
Yes.
the consequences of not resolving this are more than we want to see. And we have to find some serious answers. Well, Reverend Greg, we're kind of wrapping up now, and I'd like to ask you if you'd be so kind as to do a closing prayer for us.
I'd be glad to. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come tonight, first of all, thanking you for your many blessings unto us. God, we just thank you for this season in which we are in tonight, as we are in Ash Wednesday. It leads up to the resurrection, to your death, oh God. And so we thank you that we have those on the line tonight that are so concerned about others. We thank you for our facilitators tonight as they were sharing their heart and their gifts with us, oh God. We ask, oh God, as we have listened to them and as we have pondered these things in our hearts, we pray, oh God, that we can take back what we have learned, that we can help someone else. We know that this is a very serious topic, God, and we don't take these things for granted. And so we ask that you bless tonight. We bless us as we leave each other. Keep us safe and in your care. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Diane, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
No, just once again, we appreciate your support. I thought it was a very insightful presentation. It definitely is a topic that requires additional attention. So hopefully we can continue this dialogue at some point in the future and focus on another area about domestic violence. But it's an important topic and it impacts a lot of individuals. So let's revisit this.
Right.
Well, thank you. And thank you Kate, for joining us. We appreciate your being on board with us.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks.
So long.
Bye-bye.
And Stephanie Myers, goodbye. My goodness. My namesake here.
Goodbye, Dr. Myers. Nice to meet you. Take care.
Well, it's good to meet you too.
I thought you were related.
Email in the box. Did you put your email in the chat room?
I can do that. I already get emails, but I'll do it again. How about that?
Okay, very good, very good.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Okay.
All right. Good night,
Thank
Reverend
you.
Greg.
And I'd
Bye.
like
Good to
that
see
certificate
you.
of yours.
Great program
too.
tonight. Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, Maria.